Hey everyone, how are you doing today? Welcome to episode 1 of Potions Class. I'm your host, Elliot Lowe. I'm joined today by Joe Ennis.
What's up, everybody?
And Eric Harris.
Hello.
And I'm very excited to dive in today's first topic. It's going to be the coronavirus.
Yes, big deal right now.
Yeah, I'm sure if you are existent on this planet, and you've probably heard of the coronavirus at some point. Eric, have you heard of the coronavirus?
The what?
Thoughts?
The coronavirus. All right.
Okay. Anyway, so we're gonna start off with a quick little brief recap. Coronavirus 101 for people who might be just a little confused about what's going on in the world right now. So, beginning in December of 2019, there was an unexplained outbreak of pneumonia that began to develop in the city of Wuhan. That's in China. Wuhan. No, we're not going to keep that in. That's fine.
Yeah, that joke fell flat.
Okay, well,
we're keeping that in.
Wuhan.
Yeah, we're keeping that in.
That's fair. So rapid responses by the Chinese government. They notified the World Health Organization, here on referenced as WHO, not WHO. So Eric can track with it.
Do actual scientist people call it WHO?
Yeah.
Okay, well, for the sake of not confusing people, yeah, let's call it the WHO or something.
Have you seen the movie Sahara? Where they keep referencing
No.
WHO and they keep being
In what?
Sahara, the movie?
I've never seen it.
Did you ever see that movie with that cheetah that was like trying to get free and the kid and the cheetah ran as the poachers were trying to...
What?
Never mind.
It's
It's called like
Into the
Zuma
Wild
or Duma
Into the
or
Wild.
something.
Oh, yeah.
Life of Pi.
No.
The World Health Organization was not involved with that. Anyway, rapid responses by the Chinese government. They notified the World Health Organization December 1st of 2019, led to the tentative naming of this novel virus on January 12th as 2019 nCoV. On January 30th of 2020, the World Health Organization announced that this epidemic, epidemic, for anyone who may not know, that's a widespread occurrence of an infectious disease within a community, different than a pandemic. Pandemic's going to be worldwide. So the World Health Organization is actually a little bit more careful about how they use the word pandemic now in reference to diseases like this, because the swine flu, when that came out, they announced that as a pandemic. It had a lot of economic.
Was it actually a pandemic?
No.
Well, it ended up not being even quite as deadly as the seasonal flu, but because they labeled it a pandemic, it had a lot of economic consequences, and there was a lot of we heard about it everywhere.
Yeah, I heard about it all the time.
Like freaking out. We're going to die from the swine flu.
Yeah.
Ended up not being a huge deal. So that's something to keep in mind as we're going through this and thinking about how the World Health Organization is going to approach the naming of coronavirus. They're very careful, dance around the wording of pandemic due to consequences in the past.
So currently it's an epidemic, but it could become a pandemic.
Yes,
potentially.
It's hitting many of the categories that would require it to be a pandemic.
Gotcha.
So we'll talk a little bit about that later in the episode. So the disease that is caused as a result of this virus, so you have the virus. Mm-hmm. The disease that is caused as a result of this novel coronavirus was formally named COVID-19 on February 11th of 2020 by the World Health Organization. And the virus itself was finally given the formal name of Severe Acute Respiratory Syndrome Coronavirus 2, or SARS-CoV-2. Okay. We'll refer to as SARS-CoV-2 or just coronavirus. I think we'll just... No, because we're going to talk about coronavirus. So
scientists call it SARS-CoV-2. That's the scientific name.
That is the official name by the group of the taxonomy people that label and name coronaviruses. Cool. There's a whole group that is dedicated to naming coronaviruses and different viruses in general, and it's officially been named SARS-CoV-2.
Gotcha.
So as of the recording of this podcast, I checked about 5 minutes ago. There are 84,125 confirmed cases of SARS-CoV-2 infection worldwide, 2,868 deaths, and 36,836 recoveries.
And how does that match up against other things like the flu or whatever in the short amount of time that it's been around? Is that bad?
I mean, it's bad. We're going to talk a little bit about other coronaviruses later.
Okay.
I mean, if we're looking at the flu, I believe last year's 13 million.
Okay.
So, I mean, it's very small, but I think the concern here is that we have a naive population meaning non-exposed to this coronavirus in the past. So there's a little bit more fear as to how people are going to respond. I think that's what's...
So people are just more vulnerable to dying. Although there's only 2,000 deaths as opposed to 13 million, it's people are a lot more vulnerable as of now, it seems, to the coronavirus than they are to the flu.
I wouldn't necessarily say to dying. I would say to contracting.
Okay.
I mean, you don't have antibodies that are developed against this, and so it's going to be definitely more concerning as we're talking about naive populations coming into contact with this particular virus.
Gotcha.
Something that I heard brought up through the course of my study was you have like this range kind of when we look at infectious diseases. We have diseases like the flu that are relatively non-lethal. I mean, I think it's 0.01 or 0.1% mortality rate. Ridiculously low.
But that was still 13 million people?
Yes.
Wow.
Well, 13 million people infected, not killed.
Okay,
yes.
okay.
Yeah. So when you have a low mortality rate like that, a lot of times you see higher cases of spread. And the reason for that is because you don't have quarantines going on. You're not, people, they're not grounding planes for the flu. And people aren't dying that often from the flu, so it gives a chance for them to interact with people. It doesn't necessarily disrupt your day-to-day life too much, and so you're going to have a lot more exposure with people in your community. Compared to something like Ebola or Zika, we have these viruses that are incredibly detrimental, that are incredibly violent in their expression, and what ends up happening is you have quarantines and a much more severe response, so it leads to a higher mortality rate but a lot lower spread. So just as we're talking about this, I think it's good that we kind of walk through the timeline of the infection. So December 31st, 2019 ended with a report to the World Health Organization out of Wuhan that they had encountered an unknown source of pneumonia that was breaking out. And the following day, starting off 2020 with a bang, the Wuhan market was identified as the outbreak hub. Shortly following this, the World Health Organization started advising travel restrictions to and from Wuhan. And later that week, on the 7th, the novel coronavirus was identified, had not been named at this time. Pretty much the day after that, we started seeing the first probable cases or potential cases outside of China. The first one was in Thailand. And then later on in that week, the genome was finally released, the genome sequence, so the entire sequence for this new coronavirus, and it was shown to be associated when you look at basically the genome sequence and compare it to genome sequences of other viruses. It was shown to be similar. So
they realized, it's a virus. They looked at it and was like, this looks similar to the flu.
Well, to SARS.
Okay.
So the original SARS-CoV.
Oh, right.
Yes.
Okay.
So basically, they took the genome of it, and you can do different things.
Because this is the second SARS. This is SARS-CoV-2, not SARS-CoV.
Yes, SARS-CoV-2. As a coworker of mine dubbed it, the sequel.
Ooh.
Got him. The Empire Strikes Back.
It's the classic situation where you click Save As on your computer, and the file name is still the same. So
yeah,
the
but
computer
it just puts the parentheses 2.
Yeah. The intern is just killing it over at WHO right now.
So the way that there are ways that we can do this that I believe what they did is they took the sequence, so they took basically the genetic code for this virus, and you can run a blast on that. So that's where you just take that sequence and you can compare it to a database. And so the NIH has a database of different sequences, and it showed to have a lot of similarity with SARS-CoV, with the original SARS. So shortly following this, about 2 days later, the first death was reported. Old man, 61 years old in Wuhan. And
that was January 11th, to be clear.
Yep. And at this point, only 41 individuals were confirmed for the disease. So now this is where the stuff kind of starts to get scary. This is only a month and a half ago. And I don't want to say scary because, I don't think it's super healthy to throw around words like scary. This is where
we started paying attention.
I mean, when we go from it just being released to 2 weeks later, somebody's died. Now 41 people have the disease, and we're starting to see it spread outside of the country. It's now taking on a threat of potentially not just being an epidemic within a local area, but spreading to a wider epidemic within a region. So the 13th was the first confirmation Before it was suspected that it was that there was a case in Thailand. Now on the 13th, we have confirmation it's in Thailand. The next day, we are getting confirmation in Japan. On the 20th, we get confirmation in South Korea. And on top of that, we get the first confirmation of human-to-human transmission. So that's going to be kind of a big deal, because up until this point, we don't know if it just spread from some animal to humans, and it can't spread from human to human. But now we're seeing the first real case of human-to-human transmission.
Yeah, that's what I was going to ask, was this transmission, especially like from Wuhan, China, to like Japan, was that airborne? Was it through water?
So we're going to talk about that later a little bit. So what the belief is that this is people who were asymptomatic. They weren't showing symptoms for the disease, traveling just to and from Wuhan. It has a longer incubation period. And, you know, a lot of these cases, and this is something that we're going to talk about when we're talking about kind of how the media's played into it and people's reactions. A lot of cases just are mild. Like, a lot of people go asymptomatic with it. You don't even know that you have it.
What does asymptomatic mean?
No symptoms.
Oh, gotcha.
Yeah. So, you know, you don't know that you have it, or you might think, oh, I'm feeling a little bit under the weather. So that's going to kind of lead to the danger of widespread when we're talking about stuff like the flu. And what makes this coronavirus a little bit more of a concern to health officials is that it kind of teeters on the edge between being low symptom showing, but also having a higher mortality rate, a higher death rate than like the common flu. January 21st, 2020, first case is in the U.S., based out of Washington. The 23rd, China implements travel bans to and from Wuhan, and then several U.S. companies start to announce drug and vaccine development is underway. This has been going on since a little bit before that in other countries, but the U.S. started. I believe that the NIH announced in the week prior that they were going to start vaccine development.
Yeah, it doesn't count until the U.S. gets involved.
Yeah, it's not a real disease until we decide it is.
Yeah.
What research?
So the next day, January 24th, you guys probably saw this on the news. China started constructing that massive hospital in Wuhan and chains. And so this is going to start playing into, now we're starting to see economic problems build. So big chains such as Starbucks and McDonald's start to close in the city of Wuhan. This is going to continue to be a period, kind of a theme as we look as the disease spread and as the fear around it kind of spreads. We're going to start seeing these huge economic changes, and that's really the big concern, I think, moving forward. And why we need to have good conversations about emerging diseases in general. So January 25th, Hong Kong announces national emergency. Canada gets its first case. Nepal gets its first case. On 26th, the U.S. and France start evacuating citizens from Wuhan, and the World Health Organization declares the risk of coronavirus as high. Mexico also reports its first case. So what we're starting to see here is, all right, what we had as a centralized issue within China is starting to branch out. The World Health Organization is taking note, saying, all right, this is a serious issue. We're seeing businesses start to slow down, to close down temporarily, economic kind of grind to a halt, and people are not leaving their homes. So it's becoming more of an issue. At this point, the death toll is 213, and the infection number is 9,776, almost 10,000. And that's just on the 31st. So within a month now, from December 31st to January 31st, we are now 200 people dead, almost 10,000 people infected. And these are just the reported cases.
Right.
Like, obviously.
Yeah, that's a lot.
Yeah, that's a lot.
And so far, these deaths were isolated to China specifically, or were they in Japan or Thailand?
I believe up until this point, all of the deaths were based in mainland China. There might have been one. You can go online and, like, this stuff has just been moving so rapidly.
Yeah.
And obviously, we're not going to be able to cover every single death in, great detail. But at this point, it's been pretty localized to China with small isolated cases popping up everywhere. So that's kind of like the day-by-day timeline. And then at this point, kind of end of January going into February, we start seeing stuff kick into high gear. And as I was doing a lot of research and trying to write for this, I was like, I'm not going to be able to go day by day because every day there's something crazy happening. And so I kind of tried to break it down to things that you might have seen in the news and talk about it within week periods. So from the end of January to the first week of February, the death toll now by the end of the first week in February is 638, and the infection number is now over 31,000. The whistleblower on the coronavirus dies. There's a cruise ship in Yokohama Harbor that has 61 confirmed cases. The cruise ship that you've probably seen reports on this, the Diamond Princess. There's a lot of cases that were based on
Wait, so in a week it went from 9,000 to 31,000?
Yes.
Oh my goodness.
Yes. So, obviously there's a lot of concern there. Like that's a big jump. I think something that did happen, it either happened within this week or one of the following weeks where there was a huge spike. It wasn't actually due to a huge increase of cases. It was because they changed, and this was all over the news. People were like, China releases that it has the largest spike in confirmed cases of coronavirus. And if you look at like Johns Hopkins University, they have like a chart that kind of goes day by day and shows like the number of cases. There's a huge spike, and everyone was like, oh my goodness, this is crazy. But what really ended up happening there is
they just started reporting all the cases.
They had a new test basically that could detect it earlier, and it was more efficient. So they were able to detect cases that they had previously not been able to detect, and detect it at an earlier time. So it appeared that there was a huge jump, but if they had been using the same system all throughout, it would have there would have been probably a more steady growth there. So the cruise ship Diamond Princess confirms 10 cases, and they finished up that hospital in Wuhan with beds with 10,000 patients. Second week in February, by the end of the second week, death toll has reached 1,383, and infections are now at 64,000, almost doubling within that week. The Westerdam cruise ship, this was a cruise ship that was denied from 5 countries due to fear that passengers on board would be tested positive for coronavirus. So this cruise ship is literally just like pulling up to a country being like, can we come on land here? And they're like, no, next country.
Man,
they end up,
hey, free days on a cruise.
Yeah, that's got to be fun. Just the.
How long were they out there? Do you know?
Legend says they're still there.
At least a week, I think. And they actually ended up landing in Cambodia. 20 people tested negative, or 20 test samples came back negative. So they're like, all right, we're going to let you. And there was a little bit of controversy about that. I think people are still kind of concerned that, maybe that was not a good call on behalf of Cambodia. But, time's going to kind of tell how that narrative unravels. And Cambodia in particular is one country that they've had a really hard time detecting this because they don't really have the ability there, like the equipment to test for corona. Like they do, but it's not widespread. All right, so February 14th through the 21st, the death toll has now risen to 2,247. Infections are now at 76,000.
Okay, so it slowed down a little, but the death toll doubled.
Yes. So we're seeing a decrease in infection rate. And if you look, you can look at charts of this, and especially Johns Hopkins has a great website that kind of like lays out everything day by day, and you can look at a lot of great trends. We're starting to see a leveling out of the infection rate, which is good.
Yeah, that's good.
Would the spike in deaths be also if they tested a dead person and said, oh, they had corona and we just didn't know? Would that factor into the spike in deaths?
No, I don't think so. I think the deaths are more just based on
like they knew beforehand.
Well, as the disease, as it goes on longer and longer, people succumb to the disease. So we start seeing spikes, right? Like these people might have had the disease for 2 weeks and now are just dying.
Right. They could have had it for
it's
the
not like you get the disease
month.
and then you die instantly. And so as it goes on, we see the death toll kind of raise, but it's essentially like the death rate is going up because the disease has been around longer, but it's not going up in like a ridiculous rate where people are just dying faster now.
And it's not because it's not going up because more people are getting infected. It's going up because it's been around longer.
Yeah.
So people are now,
Gotcha.
So, but now we've got some good news. There's 18,200 people who have now been reported as recovered.
Yay.
On the Diamond Princess, a little highlight over there, we've got now 634 confirmed cases of coronavirus. This cruise is not going well.
Yeah,
they are staying.
Are they still out on the cruise ship?
No, they are not. Actually, no. That's actually, everyone's off now.
Okay.
Except for the crew. There's 500 members of the crew that are still on there waiting for international flights and stuff.
Poor guys.
So now, February 21st to the 28th, the death toll has now reached 2,850, which is not as drastic of a spike as the previous week. Infections are now at 83,000. So what you're seeing here is kind of a leveling off. And so this is where it's good that we look at things in the broad scope to be like, okay, it's not like we're seeing this exponential spike. Where it's just going to continue to go and go and go. But some things like obviously we're going to see kind of like these bursts when the virus starts making its way to new populations, and we're gonna see that a little bit as we continue to go on. So 36 6,000 people have recovered. 705 cases from the Diamond Princess are confirmed, but the ship has now been evacuated. This is as of today. This grouping of
Today
times.
is February 28th.
Yes. In the United States, the first unknown source of community spread occurred, and actually about an hour ago we just had our second case of community spread, which means that it's the second case where somebody comes up and is like, I have coronavirus, and they have no exposure to any of the countries where coronavirus has been. So that's a sign
that's kind of spooky.
Yeah, so that's a sign that now coronavirus is here in ways and that we're not familiar with.
Wow.
Well, it was
as a result of travel.
I mean, there was a case confirmed in Mexico, so it could be possible.
Okay, yeah, but I'm saying this person had no travel linkages to Mexico.
They were literally like just somewhere where no one around had coronavirus, and they're like, I now have it.
They were in a clean room.
Yeah, pretty
Like,
much.
I have coronavirus. So.
Very interesting.
How did you
Kind
get
of a
that?
big thing that also happened in this past week is Italy had a spike to 888 cases, almost overnight exploded. And this is kind of what we're worried about in countries like America, Canada, Mexico, where we're not seeing a lot of cases pop up, but overnight we could kind of have this burst. And so that's kind of what we're on the lookout for. And then when that happens, the containment becomes a bigger issue.
But correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't the situation in Italy at like a tourist, like a very touristy place or something like that?
I feel like Italy just itself is a touristy
No,
place.
it was like a resort or something, wasn't it?
There was a incident where somebody at a resort did test positive for coronavirus, and they had to do a lockdown of the resort.
Oh, I
That
thought
did
the
happen.
600 was related to that.
Iran also had a huge spike, 328, and a couple things about that is some top officials in
I heard about this,
also,
yeah.
South Korea had the biggest spike of all, 2,337. Okay, so there's actually
That's
a
a
story
lot.
with this, and we're going to touch on it in the next episode,
Cool.
which is going to deal more with like social influences. But essentially what ended up happening is that there was like this church there, and they were saying something along the lines of, there was a church congregation that kept meeting even though people had corona, and then it spread like ridiculously fast, and the government was like, this is crazy, like you guys need to give us a report of everyone that's in your church, that way we can track it. And then they were worried that maybe they hadn't, and so then they broke into the church and stole the records, and there's a whole, and that's kind of just emerging this week. As of today, the USA currently has 62 infected with 2 cases of community spread. So that's kind of where we're at today. That's a timeline up until now. And I know a lot of the questions that people had about the coronavirus weren't necessarily about like the timeline, but I think it's important before we start talking about coronavirus in particular, talking about the disease, kind of the disease COVID-19 and how SARS-CoV-2 kind of plays into the development of that. I think it's important to have a little bit of background kind of for how we've ended up here. And moving forward, we're going to be talking about what is a coronavirus. We're going to talk about the first coronaviruses. We're going to talk a little bit more about...
There's been more than one?
Yeah, there have been...
Yeah, it says in the report.
There's at least 7 known coronaviruses that infect humans. So we're going to talk a little bit about those. We're going to talk about previous epidemics. And then we're going to talk a little bit more about how SARS-CoV-2 actually works. Like, how is it that you get infected? What is the structure of SARS-CoV-2? And how does that play a role in infection? And then after that, we're going to probably take it... This has turned into, we started off doing this as kind of a one-shot introduction, but due to interest, people that I've talked to, a lot of questions being thrown towards the way of the podcast, I think we're going to break it into a couple different things. So I thought it was good to start it off with a kind of a background episode, and by the time this releases, we should have at least another episode, and then after that, we're going to have at least 1 or 2 more, but we'll see. We'll kind of play it by ear.
Cool.
Yeah. So that's your background on coronavirus. If you want to hear more about coronaviruses in general and kind of what makes this one special, what makes this one unique, then you better hit that next button. Listen to that next episode.
Yeah. Cool. So what they can expect in the next episode is just more about what coronavirus is and maybe the history of a few other coronaviruses.
Oh yeah, we're gonna dive. We're gonna do a deep dive into coronaviruses in general. We're gonna talk about the first coronaviruses. We're gonna talk about different animals that carry coronaviruses, how those viruses make their way to humans. You might have seen a lot of reports in the news about like people sadly killing their animals out of fear that
I saw that.
They might be spreading the disease, and that actually is based somewhat in reality. If we look in the past, there have been scares, in particular with cats, as a potential transmitter of SARS. So
interesting.
So we're going to kind of dive into all of that. If that sounds like something that's interesting to you, be sure to listen to the next episode. Thank you for listening to the first episode of Potions Class. Hope that what you heard today was helpful. Today we talked about the history of this new novel coronavirus. In the next episode, we're going to do a deep dive into how coronaviruses work and a little bit more about coronaviruses in general. If you like what you heard today and you'd like to start your own podcast, go over to podcastbyjoe.com and just submit him a request there. Anything that you guys want to say wrapping up?
No, this was super, super cool. Obviously, go listen to The Outside Line. Also, Eric's doing a great job hosting that one. Yeah, this was super fun, guys. I'm really excited to dive into the next one.
All right, and we'll see you next time.
Cool.